Have you ever met a woman who has ADHD or autism? Think of one off the top of your head? I'll give you a second. The answer's probably no. Or if you can, it's somebody who is very symptomatic, someone who shows a lot of symptoms of having it. That's because women and girls are less likely to be diagnosed with autism and with ADHD, even though it's just as apparent in girls as it is in boys. It's because their symptoms show up differently. This often leads to girls being misdiagnosed with other behavioral issues or not being diagnosed at all. Now, when it comes to ADHD, most girls who have it are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression than with ADHD because girls don't show what's considered the typical signs of ADHD in the same way that boys do. They show hyperactivity as a different thing than boys. Instead of being unable to sit still, as we think of ADHD as that hyperactivity, they instead are just very chatty, very sociable. A teacher in a school setting is more likely to notice the boys getting up and moving around a whole bunch than the girls who just really want to talk to their friends all the time. And that comes from the ADDetude magazine.com, a very well-known ADHD and ADD magazine website. Girls' ADHD can also present itself as inattentive, with the girls staring outside the window, twirling their hair, instead of actually focusing on their schoolwork. Boys don't really show the inattentive as much, and a girl who's inattentive is more likely to get looked at as just being, unfocused rather than actually having a mental disorder. When we move towards autism, to get diagnosed, girls have to show more behavioral problems, a significant intellectual disability, or both, more than boys do to get diagnosed. It's because their symptoms are often overlooked because they present differently. They have fewer and less obvious symptoms. Their niche interests are typical of normal girls being into like Disney or American Girl dolls rather than odd things for a girl to be into. So when your child gets super into Disney and only wants to watch Disney movies and only wants to talk about Disney, you think of it as normal because she's a girl and that's what girls are into. You don't see it as a symptom of an underlying problem. Boys on the spectrum don't really care about having friends. They are more antisocial. Girls want to fit in. They have a deep desire to connect with people. It's because of these differences in the symptoms that girls don't get diagnosed, but it's just as present in women as it is in men. I'm sure you can think of a time when you met a girl who was just super chatty, talking to everybody all the time. Well, that's a symptom of ADHD. Or a girl who had a really specific interest, was super into just like a couple things, one or two things. That's a symptom of autism. Girls also cope with having autism and ADHD in different ways, and it makes it present itself in different ways. As a child, girls will do more to cover up their symptoms, and they will try harder to compensate for their symptoms, often mimicking social cues around people. The girls will study people, like how a student who's struggling in algebra studies math. They often will become perfectionists or gain OCD-like habits to compensate for the fact that they know they aren't normal. And those facts come from Scientific America, which is a very well-known science magazine. Girls with ADHD and autism are on the spectrum just as often as boys. It's just as common. But the issue is most people still see these diseases and these mental problems as a boy's problem. It's the boys who have it. It's the boys who have it. It's not the girls. Or if the girls have it, it has to be in the extremes. Which is definitely just not, it's not true. But it's harder for a girl to get diagnosed because they just don't present the symptoms the same way. They're more likely to get diagnosed with OCD, depression, anxiety, or other behavioral disorders than with ADHD and autism. So they mimic because they're going to mimic their social cues and their niche interests fit in more with the typical females. This is causing a pandemic because people don't realize that the reason so many girls are depressed or anxious or have behavioral issues is because they probably just have ADHD or they're on the spectrum and they can't get the help that they need and they can't get the medication that will help them because they're being misdiagnosed. Girls are on the spectrum just as much as boys. Girls have ADHD and ADD just as much as boys, but they're not, no one's ever going to notice. No one's going to take note because they don't present it the same ways.